Dave Grohl has the distinction of being a key part of two major rock bands, Nirvana and the Foo Fighters. The success of the Foo Fighters is a beautiful story in many ways, one of them of course being that after the tragedy of Kurt Cobain's death, Dave was able to get back on his feet and not only continue with music, but succeed on a massive level. In my opinion, I think Dave Grohl had every right to carry on with making music after Nirvana, yet he did deal with backlash from some people who felt he shouldn't have. Later in this video, I'm going to show you a clip from my interview with Foo Fighters mixer Chris Sheldon, the man who makes The Color and the Shape, the Foo Fighters record featuring Everlong and Monkey Wrench, where I ask him about whether or not there were any lingering, unresolved feelings about Nirvana hanging in the air during the making of that album. I'm also going to show you a clip from my interview with Don Zientara, the person who recorded the original Foo Fighters demo, and various other clips, including my interview with Nirvana and Foo Fighters guitar tech Ernie Bailey, where he discusses how Kurt Cobain's death impacted him and Dave Grohl. But first, I want to read to you a quote from Dave Grohl himself, where he discusses the tragedy in his own words. This is a quote from Dave Grohl's biography, The Storyteller, Tales of Life and Music. If you're a fan of Dave Grohl, Nirvana, and or the Foo Fighters, I definitely recommend picking up a copy of this book. It's really well put together, and there's a lot of very interesting info in it. Quote, "He's gone, Dave. My knees gave out and I dropped the phone as I fell to my bedroom floor, covering my face with my hands as I began to cry. He was gone. The shy young man who had offered me an apple upon our first introduction at the Seattle airport was gone. My quiet, introverted roommate who I'd shared a tiny little apartment with in Olympia was gone. The loving father who played with his beautiful baby daughter backstage every night before each show was gone. I was overcome with a more profound sadness than I had ever imagined. I couldn't speak, I couldn't think, I couldn't stand, I couldn't breathe. I could only picture his face, knowing that I would never see him again. I would never see his strange, flat fingers, or his skinny elbows, or his piercing blue eyes, because he was gone, forever." Moments later, the phone rang again. Still on the floor, I answered, barely able to speak through the tears and hyperventilation. "Hold on, he's not dead, he's still alive." I jumped up from the soft carpet with my heart racing wildly. "Wait, are you sure?" I asked frantically. "Yes, he's still in the hospital, but he's gonna make it, Dave. He's gonna make it." In the course of 5 minutes, I had gone from the darkest day of my entire life to feeling born again. I hung up the phone. I was in shock. I was numb. I wanted to laugh or cry or have a complete nervous breakdown. I was in a state of emotional limbo. I didn't know what to feel. This was my first brush with death, and I was left utterly confused. I now knew the shattering pain of loss, but only for a brief moment before it was pushed aside like a hideous prank. My process of mourning was forever changed. From that day forward, losing someone close to me became a complicated exercise in waiting for that call to tell me it was all just a mistake, that everything was fine, and then begging the pain to come to the surface when the phone never rang. You cannot predict a person's sudden passing, but there are certain people in life that you prepare yourself to lose for whatever reason. You foolishly try to protect yourself by building a wall around your heart as a sort of preemptive defense mechanism so that when you do get that call, you are prepared somehow. Like being emotionally vaccinated, you already have built up an immunity to their inevitable passing. But this never works. It was March 3rd, 1994, when I woke up that morning in Seattle to the news that Kurt had overdosed in a hotel room in Rome. I immediately turned on the news and saw images of him strapped to a gurney as he was being rushed to the hospital in an ambulance. So I frantically began calling everyone on our team to see what was going on, praying that it was just another accidental overdose, something that had happened before. There was confusion and conflicting reports. Some were painfully dire. Some were encouraging. But no matter how much I wanted to be there, I was 5,000 miles away, feeling totally helpless. After all, I had just seen Kurt 2 nights before in Munich playing what would tragically become the last Nirvana show. From that day forward, I built my walls higher. And 36 days later, they closed in. News of Kurt's death came early in the morning on April 8th, though this time it was real. He was gone. There was no second phone call to right the wrong, to turn the tragedy around. It was final. I hung up the phone and waited for that same shattering pain to bring me to my knees again. But it didn't come. It was stuck somewhere deep within me, blocked by the trauma from a month before where I had been left in a state of conflicted emotional confusion. I don't remember much of that day other than turning on the news and hearing his name over and over again. Kurt Cobain, Kurt Cobain, Kurt Cobain. Each time his name was said, it slowly chipped away at the armor that I had designed to guard my heart. Kurt Cobain, Kurt Cobain, Kurt Cobain. I waited for the armor to be pierced, sending me to the floor one more time. but I wouldn't let it. I fought back, too afraid to feel that pain again. Kurt was more than just a name to me. He was a friend, he was a father, he was a son, he was an artist, he was a human being, and over time he had become the center of our universe, the point that our entire world orbited. But he was still just a young man, with so much to look forward to. We had so much to look forward to. That night, we all joined together at his home to somehow try to comfort each other. But the comfort was hard to find, because no matter how many brushes with death he may have had, no one had imagined it would be like this. At least not me. There was shock, followed by despair, followed by remembrance, returning to shock. I looked around the living room full of people, all the different lives that he touched, each in a different way. Family members, lifelong friends, and more recent acquaintances, all mourning in their own ways. Life would never be the same for any of us, and we were now all forever bonded by this devastating event, a wound that would certainly scar. For years, I couldn't drive within a mile of that house on Lake Washington without being shaken by crippling anxiety, remembering the sound of those cries. To this day, I am often overcome with the same profound sadness that set me to the floor the first time I was told Kurt had died. Is it time that dictates the depth of your grief when losing someone? Is the emotional relevance simply determined by the number of days that you spent together? Those 3.5 years that I knew Kurt, a relatively small window of time in the chronology of my life, shaped and in some ways still define who I am today. Is there any one show that has some sort of special meaning for you that you experienced?
I think the New Music Seminar show in New York is probably one of the most memorable, and that is because it was exciting. We were going to go out there and debut the Utero album. Nobody had heard it, and all eyes were kind of on the band as to what the follow-up to Nevermind was going to be. But I remember when we were setting up for it, we were gearing up for sound check, and we got a call saying to tear it all down and to pack the truck up, and that Kurt had died, that they had found him, and that he had turned blue. And it's one of those just weird things where you're in shock, and 15-20 minutes later you get another call saying, no, we got him moving, so let's hold off, put it all back, and we're doing the show. So I remember just thinking, like, it's like, how is this going to be any good? How is this going to be a good show? And they came out and they were unbelievable. It was the best I'd seen them in a long, long, long time. Like, they were phenomenal that night. So, wow. Yeah, so I think it was not only was it like sonically one of the most gratifying shows, but also just as an emotional roller coaster. It's something where you walked out at the end of that night just going, oh, that was that day.
That's crazy. So if I may ask, if you don't want to talk about it, no problem. You just mentioned now, when you heard Kurt died, you were shocked and you heard he wasn't dead. Mm-hmm. When the actual news of him passing away came out, did you believe it at first?
No, I didn't. It was one of those things where you sort of felt like, oh, okay, well, you're familiar with this drill, and we'll just give it a little time. And, as the events, as the day progressed, there was just more and more things, seeing it on TV and seeing and hearing things that you couldn't believe what you were hearing. And they were absolutes.
So you started working with the Foo Fighters after the fact. Were you surprised that you got back into music? Because I've heard interviews of Dave where he said he just he felt he had to move on. He had to keep making music. He had to go forward. But after he needed some time off first. Did you feel the same way?
Yeah, I think that I was probably more uncertain as to what would happen. Well, shortly after Nirvana ended, I got a job offer to go work for the Rolling Stones as a bass tech. Bill Wyman had just left. And so I remember declining that and just thinking that, the Stones have been around forever. They've got a road crew that have been around forever. And, with Nirvana, you had this good fortune that these were your friends, and that, there's not a lot of pressure on you, in that way. So this would be going to work for a really big band with kind of a hardened road crew where you'd be the new person, and you've just gone through something that you're just not emotionally prepared to do much of anything, make breakfast. So, so I remember after that year had passed, after Kurt was gone, it was really difficult. And part of it is this experience of somebody who is in your circle being a public figure who passes. It's really unlike, anything else, because, I, at the time, it's one of those things where it's no secret that you work for this band. Most of your friends know this, and a lot of people around you know this. Well, something like this happens, and even though this isn't somebody that all your friends work with or know on a first-hand basis, their losses are real as well. They've lost somebody that they were, they paid attention to, and somebody that they enjoy. And the first thing they feel like they need to do is to reach out to you and to connect. And so a normal process is, if you were to lose somebody in your circle, probably nobody knows it unless you announce it or share it with somebody. So often we'll go to work and we'll get lost in our work as a way to process this. And you might have a friend at this work that you enjoy talking to and getting their perspective with. And so I think, in a typical scenario, you would share these things, and you would sort of dole out your grief according to your readiness, if you're prepared to. But this was something where you're just being inundated with, usually the lead-in was like, hey, I've been thinking about you. How you doing? It's like, oh, pretty good. Well, I can't stop thinking about it. You're like, oh, okay. Here we go again. And it was just a constant. It was over and over and over. And so it was just something that you really couldn't escape. And so I remember after a year when Dave called up, I knew that he had the Foo Fighter, project rolling, and he said, hey, we're going to get in the van and go on tour in a couple of days. You want to just jump in and just go? And it was just nearly an impulsive decision, but it was like, yeah, let's go. I just want to get out of here. And it was the best thing you could have ever done. It was just to get out of your life for a minute, to get out of Seattle and to get out of your routine and just get in the van and just go. And we were productive again and doing something new. And it was fantastic. And I think the only thing that was sort of bizarre was that where we couldn't fully escape was that every night we were looking at people in the front row, and a good number of them were wearing a shirt with Kurt's face staring at you all night. And so you couldn't completely, get lost in this thing, which is fine.
That's crazy. Thank you so much for sharing that. I really, really appreciate it. It's been 26 years. Are the feelings still as raw as they were back then, or how do you deal with it now?
No, in fact, but the funny thing is that they took a really long time, and it was probably about 5 years ago that I realized you were finally at a point where it didn't really affect you in the same way that it did for a long time. And that was when this idea of this abnormality about, how we, typically, I think, throughout life when somebody passed on, there was this natural process where, just this loss of their presence, and eventually, with the way that memory works and keeping things around, you would begin to lose these details of people, and they would eventually fade, into the past, and you would move forward. Well, this is one where, constantly you go into the grocery store and you'd see, a magazine on the rack, and you're just like, wow, and it was just weekly. And so it was something where I think that in some ways, Kurt changed from being just like a person that you knew to something that's, he's now like a legendary person. He's something that's, he's just nothing like what you understood it to be. And so, and it really sort of like crosses the line to where what you remember is so far gone, and you can just not relate at all to what other people are thinking and feeling.
I hear you. With someone like Kurt, I mean, I was speaking with Alice Wheeler a little while back, and she told me that, Kurt was a very good friend of hers, and when she would hear people like on the TV or radio talking about him like he was this sort of god figure, it kind of bothered her because, yes, he was super famous, but he was a person at the end of the day. In your opinion, what is the biggest misperception of Kurt that there is out there?
I don't know the answer to that because I don't know that I have an understanding of how the mainstream views him. So, I mean, I guess I can kind of take a guess that, that he's sort of seen as this perfect product. But yeah, he was a guy who was really good at his job. And, he wrote amazing songs. He knew how to sing, and he knew how to be an entertainer. So I guess I sort of view him as that. He's like one of those people who was really exceptional at what he did.
Ernie, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. This was wonderful. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with me.
Yeah, thank you for treating it with care and for understanding that too, because it is, it's a weird thing, and it's something that I think you understand you have to harden yourself to it in order to process it. It was an incredibly strange experience. Truth is so much greater than fiction, especially in this thing. The reality of it, of this experience was so unlike anything I'd ever imagined.
This is a bit personal, so if you don't want to answer, you don't have to. When, Kurt passed, how did that affect you personally?
Yeah, I mean, of course his death touched me. I mean, that was really it affected all of us that knew him or had been, I mean, I'd seen him 2 weeks previously just on the street, and it was, very deeply affecting. I went to the private memorial for him. I didn't go to the one at the Seattle Center across the street. So, and it's, I mean, I think we've all kind of, for a while, we didn't want to talk about it or process it or, and then as time went by, we're just, you just get more comfortable, and it's just,
The Foo Fighters' second record, The Color and the Shape, was released on May 20th, 1997, about 3 years after Nirvana came to an end. When Dave Grohl first started the Foo Fighters, there were some Nirvana fans who were upset with him for starting a new band. I spoke with Chris Sheldon, the mixer behind The Color and the Shape, and asked him if there was any sort of lingering Nirvana baggage hanging over the making of that record. This is what he had to say. I wanted to ask you a Nirvana-related question. It's because, this was in 97 or late 96, early 97 when this recording was happening. Nirvana, I mean, obviously just ended less than 3 years prior. Was there any sort of Nirvana hangover kind of a feeling going on with the band?
No, not at all. I mean, the only thing that was the same really was same manager, John Silver, who again I'd worked with a long time ago with a band. So we had a nice relationship anyway, and John had managed Nirvana. So that was the only thing. I mean, it was never really talked about. I mean, maybe they talked about it some more in the recording when they're in the recording studio and talking about stuff. I don't know, but no, not at all. It was not. This was like a whole new thing.
Okay, that's good to hear, because I always I'm very familiar with Nirvana, but I'm not as familiar with the Foo Fighters, and I've heard that, especially in the beginning of the Fighters, there was a lot of people who were upset at Dave for actually having started a new band. Right away.
I can imagine there probably were. I mean, people get upset for the weirdest things, and also people get very proprietorial about music. You know what it's like. It's like you find some new band, and then they have a hit record, and then it's like, this is no good. This is my band. I love this. People don't like change. And they say it's like, no. You did Nirvana. You can't do anything else. Certainly not play guitar. But no, there was nothing like that at all. It was very, and I say I was there to do a job, and just get on with it. It was pretty easy, to be honest with you.
In one of my interviews with veteran radio broadcaster Alan Cross, he spoke to me about how he broke the news of Kurt Cobain's death on the radio and what that day was like from a radio broadcaster's perspective.
Something big was happening. We want to be part of it. We want to know as much as we possibly can. But there's no internet. There's no email. There's no YouTube. There's none of that sort of stuff. The only thing that people could do to get the latest news on what was happening was to listen to the radio. That was it. And I remember that day being, okay, this is our JFK moment. This is our John Lennon was shot moment. This is our Elvis Presley died moment. Everybody is depending on us to tell them what's going on. And the way things had evolved was this was as close to delivering the messages, the news in real time as we could get. Now, we had a teletype which would spit out the news, from all the different news services. So they were the ones who were gathering the news on our behalf. The only other thing that we could do is get on the phone and call anybody that we might know in Seattle or somebody associated with the band to give us an update on what was going on. And it was really old school. So, at 3:30, Anita, who was my newswoman at the time, came in, handed me the bulletin from the Associated Press, and I read that on the air. And that was like Walter Cronkite taking off his glasses and telling everybody that JFK had died at Parkland Hospital.
That's crazy. And how did that affect you emotionally at all that day? Like, how did you handle that personally?
No, well, you get in the zone. And the zone was, okay, we got a job to do. This is really important. Don't screw it up. Let's be as accurate as we possibly can. And remember that people are depending on us, not any other radio station in the city. Us, and specifically me, because it all happened when I was on the air. So it was me and Anita. And I don't know, I probably have never had a larger audience than I did that day, because news started coming in at 2:00. And then every 10 minutes, Anita would break in with more news. And then I would say something. And so 2:00, 2:15, 2:20, 2:25, 2:45, another newscast at 3:00, 3:15, and then 3:30, there's the news.
That's
So for that hour and a half to 2 hours, it was like, wow, because we didn't hear anything. So Kurt was found by the electrician around 9:00 in the morning, Seattle time. So that would have been noon. So by the time everything started to drift out, it took about 90 minutes for the first story to move on the wire, saying that a body has been found at 171 Lake Washington Boulevard East. And that is the residence of Kurt Cobain. There seems to be a violent death. So it's like, okay. All right, we know where this is going. It's either one of Kurt's drug buddies has died, or it's Courtney, or it's Kurt.
I was far too young to have any personal recollection of Kurt's death, but in my lifetime, I remember perfectly Chris Cornell's death. I was in my kitchen, and then on the TV, it said, rock star Chris Cornell has passed away, and I was shocked. And then I remember I was driving to work, and then it came on the radio, and I actually just pulled over and for a second to listen to the radio and to hear what they're saying. And I just remember being kind of shocked by it. Was Chris Cornell's death similar at all in the way you guys handled it on the radio, or did the internet change that experience?
The internet changed the experience because it got out on Twitter first. So everybody was talking about it by the time we got on the air with it, because, well, the internet moves at the speed of light. And the only thing that moves faster than the speed of light is bad news on the internet. So we couldn't compete, because now, a lot of us, and if we do it right and we use the platform properly, Twitter is the one of the greatest breaking news sources that has ever been invented. That's where I heard about Michael Jackson. So I was coming home from work on the GO train, and I'm flipping through my Twitter feed, and it's like, here it is. And from there, it just exploded.
Yeah, that's nuts. Yeah, I was going to ask you about Chester Bennington, but that was so quickly afterwards. I guess it would have probably been more or less the same kind of.
It was kind of the same thing, but for some reason, well, it was also shocking because Chester seemed to be, I don't know, he just seemed to be such a likable guy, and I think people were, because he was also so very open about his mental state, that a lot of people identified with him. because people who were hurting and so on. So that when he died, there was like, oh no, he couldn't make it. Something happened. Must be a mistake, or he gave up, or man, he must have been in pain. That kind of thing. But it was still the same kind of shocking thing because we didn't expect it. Nobody saw it with both Chris Cornell and with Chester Bennington. Nobody thought.
Do you think that Kurt Cobain's death has made him into more of, I guess, for lack of a better word, a legendary figure than if he was still alive?
Yeah, I think so. Again, he's like Jim Morrison. He's like Jimi Hendrix. He's like Janis Joplin. He, died at that magical age of 27 at the height of his powers.
Do you think the fact that Kurt Cobain passed at such a young age and that Nirvana was only around for a handful of years, do you think that contributed to their fame in a certain way?
Absolutely. The fact that they burned bright and very loud for a very short period of time. I mean, it's such a rock and roll story. It's it's the kind of thing that people gravitate to. But none of that would have mattered had the music not been any good. Now, what people forget is that when Nirvana released the Utero album in 1993, people were getting tired of them. They were beginning to move on to other forms of alternative music beyond grunge, Industrial Chili Peppers, Nine Inch Nails, go on. And when the first week in the United States, the In Utero album, I mean, one of the most anticipated records you would think of that decade, it sold less than 200,000 copies in the U.S. the first week. So people were growing tired of it. And when they heard it, it was, well, this isn't Nevermind Part 2, which is what we wanted. It was something a lot more raw, a lot more rugged. And where were the catchy hit songs like, Come As You Are and In Bloom and Smells Like Teen Spirit and so on? It just wasn't received. And it was considered by the record company to be substandard. In fact, they made him remix it. And when the audience heard it, it was like, okay, this is good, but it's not what we expected. Oh, by the way, we've got other alternative music to listen to now. In 91, they didn't, not really. But now things had completely exploded and opened up.
I heard somewhere, I'm not sure if this is true, but I heard it on a radio station a couple of years back, and it's always stuck in my mind. Somebody was saying that prior to Kurt's death, Pearl Jam was actually starting to become more popular than Nirvana, and then
no, that's not necessarily true. Pearl Jam had a very long and slow rise. Their album came out in the summer of 91, and people weren't really sure where to categorize them. I mean, we at The Edge held off playing Pearl Jam because we thought they were just another mainstream rock band. Same thing with Alice in Chains. We wouldn't touch Alice in Chains at first because, oh no, that's just another, mainstream rock band, and we're an alternative station. But after a while, until really 92, we kind of avoided it, the band because of that, I guess it's a stigma or that preconception of what they were. But by the time Kurt dies, Pearl Jam is definitely bigger than Nirvana. Their Versus album, when it came out, sold more records in a week, almost 900,000 records in a week, and that was a record for that time. So yeah, they were certainly bigger than Nirvana by the time they got to their second album.
Should Kurt not have passed away, and there's this kind of legend around the band, do you think that right now Pearl Jam would have remained the more popular band, quote unquote?
I do, and I think what would have happened is that I think that Nirvana would have probably broken up anyway after the In Utero album, and Kurt would have gone on to do something on his own as a solo artist. If you listen to some of the tapes that he left behind, he was definitely looking to change the kind of music he was making. And I think he was a little bit self-destructive when it came to his idea of being famous. He would not, he had all the money he needed. So he was very much an artist and had, tasted fame. And it's like, okay, I've been there, done that. Now I'm going to go try something else. And so I think that's what would have happened. Kurt would have become some sort of, he might have become like a Mark Lanigan, who was the singer of the Screaming Trees. He might have become somebody, like Josh Homme of Queens of the Stone Age, who went and did all these projects, and his tastes and styles went with the wind. I think that's what would have happened. Nirvana would have never made it through 1995.
Because there were many stories suggesting that Kurt wanted to do some kind of an acoustic Nirvana record with Michael Stipe.
100%. He actually had a plane ticket to go see Michael Stipe in Georgia, and he never got on the plane.
Now, of course, one of the important bands from the DC punk scene is Scream, and you have a relationship with the Foo Fighters. So, did your relationship with the Foo Fighters start through Scream?
Yeah, it did. It started through Scream. I stopped in a couple of their practices with the different drummers, including Dave Grohl when they was there. And I know Pete Stahl pretty well. He lives on the West Coast, and his brother Franz. And basically, when Dave was he finished with Nirvana, he asked me to we could do some demos together. And he didn't have a name for the band yet, but he wanted to do some demo songs and enlist some people to play in the band. So we recorded some demos together, and this is, I forgot how many years ago. So we sort of kept on the relationship. I think it's just a musical relationship, which isn't super close, but he lives on the West Coast, of course, and and I live here, and they're all good people. I mean, I try to stick with good people.
So, having recorded the original Foo Fighters demo, what was that experience like? How were the sessions?
I think Dave had his sister play bass. He played drums, and he played bass and guitar and sang. And what happened was basically it was extremely laid back in the sense that, being the producer that he was at the time, he had to produce it. He had to play on all the instruments except for the bass. He had to sort of figure out the songs as it went along. He couldn't become too stressed out or too intense in any one area. And what I saw was when he wanted to play, he had a wireless guitar thing. He basically sat in an easy chair and played guitar parts.
Okay, so you mentioned now that his sister was at the sessions. Did anybody else from Dave Grohl's family show up?
His mother came down for the Foo Fighters sessions, and I talked to her for a little while. But that's all. When they were Scream, they lived in a group house in Springfield, and so and a lot of musical groups do. But they had a group house there that they lived in all together. And, made it easy to practice and all that.
Hey, that's cool. Yeah. So what was Dave like as a person, just if you remember?
It was great. He was great. He's a nice guy. Real nice guy. And like I said, very, very low stress in the sense that he knew what he was going for. He knew what he wanted. But he wasn't like jittery to get it and to make you get it or to go along with him. He'll get there. He'll get there. When he wanted to sing, I can't even remember how he did it, but it may have been just a microphone sitting in front of the console singing. It wasn't the type of thing where you think about, okay, let's do it all the traditional ways, and we must do it in this way, and we must have the best microphones and the most acoustic settings for these things. It was more like, let's get the part down, let's listen to it. If it isn't to our liking or if it doesn't sound the way we want, well, we could do it again. This is a recording studio.
Yeah.
And that's a nice attitude to take where, a creative person could actually just do stuff, keep doing stuff.
So you were saying that, the session was unique for various reasons. Because it was so not cookie cutter, did you ever feel like this might not go so well or this might come out amazing? Like, was there ever any kind of feeling like that?
No, not in the least. One other thing, good musicians, I was going to say professional musicians, but, not all of them are professional. Some of them are amateur musicians, but they do it very, very well, is they have kind of a routine, but it's a flexible routine. And they know if they sort of follow along through these things, they will get results one way or another. So there was never any question about if it was going to come out correctly. I mean, songs aside, it was going to come out correctly. If the song was bad, okay, it might not have sounded that good. No, people might not have listened to it, but it didn't. And the songs basically came out to their liking because they kept at just pushing ahead. Hey, this is good, but let's try this with there, and try this and try this. A lot of trial and error. Like I said, it's a routine, but it's a very flexible routine where you're in your lane, but that doesn't mean you have to be in the center of the lane exactly all the time. You could veer a little to the left and a little to the right, but you get there. You definitely get there. And that's what people have to realize. You can get there like that. And you have to just sort of be less stressed out about getting it done a certain way, or using a certain amp, or using a certain guitar, or using a certain drum set, or heads on the drums, or a microphone, anything. It matters less. It does matter, but it matters less.